I spent 6 months in Antarctica fixing communications equipment for a private research contractor, which sounds a lot cooler than it actually is because most days it was just frozen fingers, canned soup, and praying the satellite uplink didn't die during a storm. But the money was good, and after my wife passed, I kind of stopped caring where in the world I was as long as it stayed quiet enough for me to think. The only thing I looked forward to was coming home to my land in western Pennsylvania, 7 acres of old grass, half wildwoods, and one giant white oak tree that stood near the property line like it had personally decided to guard the place after she died. Maggie and I planted that tree in 1981, back when we were broke, dumb, and still thought love automatically solved everything. We buried our dog under that tree, carved our initials into the bark after too much whiskey one summer night, hung lanterns from the branches during our anniversary parties. Hell, her memorial service was held under that tree because I couldn't stand the idea of putting her in some cold funeral home with fake flowers and fluorescent lighting. So yeah, that tree wasn't just a tree. It was the last physical thing in my life that still felt like us. Now while I was gone, the old auto garage next door had been turned into one of those trendy heritage woodworking studios, the kind with reclaimed brick walls, Edison bulbs dangling from the ceiling, and furniture so expensive you start wondering if rich people have some kind of secret tax write-off for ugly tables. The place was called Blackthorn Atelier, which already sounded like a company that charged $12 for coffee and called burgers handcrafted beef experiences. I'd only seen the owner once before leaving. This guy named Everett Kane, mid-30s maybe, beard sculpted like he spent more time conditioning it than most people spend raising children. He gave me the fake friendly neighbor routine at first, complimented the land, asked about the oak tree, said stuff like, "You can't buy that kind of natural character anymore." Looking back now, that sentence should have sounded like a threat. I landed back home in early March after 32 straight hours of flights and layovers, exhausted enough to hallucinate, but the first thing I did after tossing my bags inside was walk toward that tree. That was always the ritual. Didn't matter if I'd been gone 2 weeks or 2 months. I'd put my hand on the bark like checking the pulse of the property itself. Except this time I got halfway across the field and stopped dead because the skyline looked wrong. Empty. There was sunlight pouring through a space that should have been covered in branches. At first my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe fog, maybe exhaustion, maybe I was standing at the wrong angle. Then I got closer and saw the stump. Fresh cut. Chainsaw marks still pale against the wood. Sawdust frozen into muddy clumps from recent rain. 80 feet of living history reduced to a flat circle in the dirt. I just stood there staring for a minute because grief does this weird thing where your body refuses to catch up with reality. My chest felt hollow, like somebody had reached in and scooped something out with both hands. Then I noticed tire tracks leading toward Blackthorn Atelier. That's when the anger hit. I walked into their showroom smelling like jet fuel and airport coffee, and the second those polished wood tables came into view, I knew. You ever recognize something before your brain fully processes it? Like seeing your childhood dog in a crowd 20 years later? That's what it felt like. The grain pattern, the pale streaking in the oak, the knots. I knew every inch of that tree better than I knew my own face. Front and center sat this massive live-edge dining table under a spotlight with a little placard beside it that read, Monarch Series, White Oak, $14,500. 14.5 grand. There were matching benches, floating shelves, custom panels mounted on the wall like museum art. Champagne glasses sat on silver trays because apparently stealing from a grieving widower pairs nicely with Pinot Noir. Then I saw it. On one of the coffee tables, right beneath the glossy finish, there was a faint scar in the grain where someone had tried sanding deeper than they should have. But they missed part of it. You could still make out the outline of a carved heart and 2 sets of initials. D+M. My knees almost buckled. I heard this smooth voice behind me go, "Beautiful piece, isn't it?" I turned around, and there was Everett, smiling like a guy who genuinely believed he was the smartest person in every room he entered. Expensive flannel shirt, shiny watch, teeth so white they looked artificial. He spread his arms toward the showroom like he was unveiling the Sistine Chapel. I asked him where the wood came from. He didn't even hesitate. "Oh, locally sourced premium oak," he said, fully cleared during adjacent development prep. Adjacent development prep. Listen to that wording. That's rich guy language for, we took something that wasn't ours and hired enough people to make it sound legal. I told him that oak tree stood on my property. His smile tightened for half a second, just enough. Then he shrugged. Well, according to our contractor, there was a boundary discrepancy, but everything was processed through standard channels. Standard channels. That phrase right there usually means somebody's about to screw you with paperwork. I asked him if he had my signature authorizing removal. No, but that was all I needed to hear. Still, Everett kept talking because men like that always think confidence can substitute for morality. The material has already been transformed into commissioned inventory, he said. Some of these pieces are heading to clients in Los Angeles next week. So if you believe there's been a misunderstanding, you're welcome to contact our attorney. Misunderstanding. Yeah, because accidentally turning my dead wife's memorial tree into luxury furniture was apparently just one of life's little mix-ups. Then I noticed the giant banner hanging near the entrance. Spring Collection Showcase, Saturday, private buyers event. 3 days away. Catered event. Press coverage. Influencers. Investors. Everett followed my eyes to the banner and smiled again. But this time there was something smug underneath it, like he thought money had already buried the problem. And right there, standing in that overpriced lumber museum smelling cedar polish and arrogance, I realized something. He thought I was going to yell, maybe threaten him, maybe cry. What he didn't realize was this. I'd spent 20 years working around government contractors, shipping companies, and legal compliance departments. I knew exactly how dangerous paperwork could become when somebody got careless. So I looked him dead in the eye, nodded once, and said, "Got it." That actually seemed to relax him. Big mistake. Because the second I walked back to my truck, I stopped being a grieving husband and became a man building a case. Now, before I get into what happened next, let me explain something, because a lot of people hear stories like this and immediately think, well, if the tree was near the property line, maybe it was just an honest mistake. And sure, sometimes that happens. Property disputes in America get messy fast, especially in rural areas where fences were built 30 years ago by a guy named Earl holding a beer and eyeballing distances. But this situation? No. This smelled wrong from the start. According to standard procedure, no legitimate contractor touches a mature tree near a boundary line without a survey, written authorization, permits, and documented ownership confirmation. Especially not an 80-foot white oak worth tens of thousands in lumber value. Any professional woodworker knows exactly how valuable old-growth oak is. So when Everett kept throwing around words like misunderstanding and adjacent development prep, what he was really doing was trying to create psychological fog, enough corporate-sounding language to make an average homeowner doubt themselves. This is a psychological trap people with money use all the time. They act calm, polished, educated. Meanwhile, you're emotional because something personal got violated. And suddenly you start worrying that maybe you are the unreasonable one. That's intentional. From a legal perspective, though, trees are property. Doesn't matter if they're sentimental or not. If somebody cuts down a tree on your land without permission, especially one with documented value, they can get hammered financially. In some states, triple damages apply automatically. And once stolen timber gets converted into commercial products, oh, now you've got a whole different level of liability because every sale becomes evidence. The lesson here is, people like Everett survive because most victims react emotionally first and strategically second. I decided I was going to reverse that order. I drove home that afternoon trying not to let rage outrun logic because anger makes people sloppy, and sloppy people lose. Everett was counting on me to explode, maybe storm back into the showroom, maybe make threats loud enough for security cameras to catch. Because once you become the unstable emotional neighbor, guys like him suddenly look very reasonable in court. So instead, I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and started building a timeline. First thing I pulled out was the original property survey from when Maggie and I bought the land back in the early 80s. Folded yellow paper, coffee stains on the corners, little handwritten notes from the county surveyor who'd probably been dead 20 years now. And there it was clear as day. The oak stood 6 feet inside my property line. Not inches. Feet. No ambiguity. No overlap. No boundary discrepancy. Everett's people hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a decision. Then I found the photographs. Wedding anniversary pictures under the branches. Christmas lights wrapped around the trunk one winter. Maggie sitting in a lawn chair holding cocoa with that tree towering behind her like some kind of cathedral pillar. I even found a photo from 1987 where we'd carved our initials into the bark after too much bourbon and an argument that somehow turned into laughing. That same scar was now sitting underneath polyurethane finish in a $4,000 coffee table. That part messed me up more than I expected. See, grief changes shape over time. People think losing someone gets smaller as years pass, but it doesn't. It just hardens into the walls of your everyday life. You learn how to carry it quietly. And when somebody tears into one of the last places that grief still lives safely, it feels personal in a way that's hard to explain. Anyway, around 7 that night, I called an old colleague named Raymond Pike, retired forestry consultant. Guy spent 30 years testifying in illegal logging cases across 3 states. Dry sense of humor, suspicious of everybody, looked like a man carved out of driftwood. I emailed him photos. 10 minutes later, he called back and said, "Oh, they're screwed. Turns out wood grain patterns are basically fingerprints. Growth rings, not placement, scarring, density, all traceable if you know what you're doing." Raymond referred me to a forensic arborist named Denise Corbett who specialized in timber theft litigation. Yeah, apparently that's a real thing. America's a magical place. By the next morning, Denise was out on my property taking core samples from the stump while I showed her old photographs. She didn't say much at first, just worked quietly with this intense focus surgeons have. Finally, she stood up, brushed dirt off her gloves, and said, "If that furniture came from this tree, I can prove it." That sentence right there felt better than therapy. Then came the fun part. I contacted a commercial salvage company I'd once worked with during a research facility demolition project. Big guys, flatbed trucks, hydraulic lifts. The kind of people who remove industrial equipment while eating gas station burritos and joking about OSHA violations. I explained the situation and asked one simple question. If I get a court order authorizing seizure of stolen property, can you clear a showroom fast? The guy on the phone laughed for about 10 seconds straight. "Oh, buddy," he said, "we can clear a Walmart before lunch." Now here's where Everett made his second mistake. He'd advertised the showcase publicly, which meant inventory lists, promotional photos, social media previews, evidence everywhere. Every item made from my tree was documented online like some arrogant little confession. According to standard procedure, once converted stolen property enters commercial sale, courts can authorize emergency injunctive relief to prevent disposal before litigation concludes. Fancy wording for, "Don't let this idiot sell the evidence." So by Friday afternoon, my attorney filed for an emergency seizure order supported by the survey, arborist report, photographic history, and showroom documentation. At 8:43 p.m. Friday night, the judge signed it. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, one of those mornings where the sky looks metallic. I parked half a block away from Blackthorn Atelier and watched staff setting up through the windows. White tablecloths, champagne buckets, catering trays. Everett floated around in designer boots, pointing at floral arrangements like he was preparing for the royal wedding. At exactly 10:02 a.m., 3 vehicles pulled up together. County sheriff, my attorney, and 3 salvage trucks. You ever see confidence die in real time? Because I have. Everett walked toward the entrance smiling at first, probably assuming we were there over some paperwork issue. Then Deputy Morales handed him the seizure order. I watched his eyes move across the page. The color drained out of his face so fast it honestly impressed me. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. My attorney answered calmly. "Court-authorized recovery of stolen property, pending civil and criminal proceedings." Everett laughed. Actually laughed. "This is absurd. These pieces belong to paying clients." Deputy Morales replied, "Not anymore." And then the salvage crew walked in. Now listen, I'm not proud of how satisfying this part felt. Those guys moved with military efficiency. Plastic wrap, dollies, inventory tags. Within minutes, they were disconnecting display lighting and hauling furniture toward the loading bay. The massive dining table Everett had bragged about? Gone. Matching benches? Gone. Wall panels? Gone. Coffee table with our initials carved into it? Wrapped like museum cargo and wheeled straight past him. Everett completely lost control. He started shouting about reputational damage, screaming at employees, threatening lawsuits, demanding names and badge numbers. At one point, he actually stepped in front of a moving dolly yelling, "You can't take commissioned inventory." One salvage worker looked at him and said, "Buddy, I once repossessed a helicopter from a billionaire during his birthday party. You are not the most dramatic part of my week. I almost smiled. Almost. Then Everett turned toward me. And man, the hatred in his eyes. Pure venom. Because for the first time since this started, he realized money wasn't going to protect him. All that polished branding, all that curated masculinity and artisanal storytelling, stripped away in front of his staff and clients. You did this over a tree, he spat. That sentence told me everything about him. Over a tree. Not over theft. Not over trespassing. Not over cutting down 40 years of somebody else's memories for profit. Just a tree. So I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him a photograph. Maggie standing beside the oak in autumn, smiling at something outside the frame. You cut this down for dining room furniture, I said quietly. Don't stand there pretending you don't understand what you took. For a second, he actually looked shaken. Not guilty, just shaken that consequences had arrived. By around noon, invited guests started showing up. Luxury SUV after luxury SUV pulling into a parking lot full of sheriff vehicles and half-empty showrooms. Imagine driving 2 hours for a champagne furniture event only to find grown men carrying out tables while the owner sweats through his flannel shirt arguing with deputies. One woman walked inside, looked around at the empty floor, and literally asked, "Is this performance art?" By 1:30 p.m. somebody had posted footage online. By dinner time local news stations picked it up. By Sunday morning headlines were everywhere. Woodworking studio accused of using stolen memorial tree. And once the internet smelled blood, Everett was finished. Former clients started commenting publicly. Somebody dug up reviews from contractors claiming Blackthorn Atelier ignored permits. Former employees began sharing stories about rushed sourcing practices and creative paperwork. One ex-worker claimed Everett bragged that rural homeowners never check permits anyway. That quote alone probably cost him 50 grand. Then Monday hit. Insurance denied coverage because stolen material voided commercial protection clauses. Tuesday, investors pulled out of an expansion project. Wednesday morning, my attorney got a call from Everett's lawyer asking whether I'd consider avoiding criminal prosecution. Now here's the thing. I could have buried him. Seriously. Timber theft, destruction of property, unlawful harvesting, commercial fraud, interstate sale of stolen goods. Prosecutors love cases with clean evidence and arrogant defendants. Everett might not have gone to prison, but financially, professionally, socially, he was already halfway into the grave. But vengeance gets heavy after a while. And honestly, none of it was bringing Maggie's tree back. So I made an offer. $95,000 in damages. Full written public apology. Return of every remaining wood fragment from the oak. And a permanent acknowledgement that the tree had been taken unlawfully from private land. His lawyer accepted before I even finished the sentence. A week later, I watched Everett stand outside the county courthouse reading a prepared apology to local reporters. His voice sounded hollow, beard trimmed shorter, eyes exhausted. And the weirdest part? I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. Because at the end of the day, justice doesn't always feel victorious. Sometimes it just feels quiet.